I am Naomi, 35 years old, and for over a decade, my own mother and sister treated me like an invisible background character in my own family. While my sister Jada was showered with praise for her glamorous lifestyle and fake high society connections, I was relegated to being the hardworking scapegoat whose only purpose was to listen to their constant criticism. Last Christmas, my family hosted their annual holiday dinner at our family estate in Atlanta, complete with fine china, expensive catering, and an endless parade of passive-aggressive jabs directed straight at me. My sister Jada leaned across the mahogany table, her eyes glinting with malicious delight as she adjusted her designer diamond bracelet. She took a slow sip of her vintage red wine, ensured the entire table of relatives was paying attention, and sneered loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "You're already 35 and still single. Must be tough spending Christmases all alone while the rest of us have actual families." A ripple of cruel laughter erupted around the dining room. My brother-in-law Spencer, a flashy commercial real estate developer who loved nothing more than flaunting his wealth, chuckled into his napkin and chimed in with a condescending joke about my biological clock running out of time. My mother Vivian did not hesitate to join in on the cruelty. She patted Jada's hand with glowing pride, turned to me with an amused smirk, and waved her hand dismissively, saying, "Oh, calm down, Naomi, she's just joking. You know Jada always tells it like it is." In that exact second, something fundamental inside me shifted forever. I looked around at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me, seeing their cheap cruelty for what it truly was. I carefully set my crystal glass down on the crisp white tablecloth, met my mother's mocking gaze, and said calmly, "Don't worry about me, Mom. I've been married for a long time." My mother froze mid-toast. The laughter in the room died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. Jada scoffed, her smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second before her face twisted back into a look of absolute disdain. "Married to who? Naomi, did you hire an actor on Craigslist just to save face at Christmas dinner?" Spencer laughed out loud, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Come on, Naomi. We all know you spend 70 hours a week at that mid-level office job of yours. What self-respecting man is going to marry someone who never has time to build a real life?" Before I could even respond, the heavy brass chime of the front doorbell rang through the mansion, breaking the tense silence. Everyone instinctively turned their heads toward the grand foyer. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer a single word of defense. I simply lifted my wrist, glanced down at my custom Cartier watch, a subtle detail of true luxury that my status-obsessed family was far too blind to ever notice, and looked back up at my mother. "He just parked the car," I said quietly, the steady confidence in my voice echoing across the silent dining room. Growing up in our affluent neighborhood, my childhood was defined by a rigid, unspoken hierarchy. My parents, Vivian and Marcus, built a comfortable life running Williams Estate, a legacy wine distribution business founded by my grandfather. From the moment my younger sister Jada was born, she was crowned the undisputed golden child of the household. She possessed the kind of loud, superficial charm that my parents mistook for brilliance. Where I was quiet, analytical, and dedicated to my studies, Jada was impulsive, image-obsessed, and ruthlessly manipulative. Whenever Jada brought home average grades, my parents bought her expensive clothes to encourage her. When I graduated at the top of my class and earned a full academic scholarship to business school, my achievement was barely acknowledged over dinner because Jada had just been selected for the local debutante court. My mother always made it clear that my primary value was to stay out of the way, work hard, and never outshine my sister. As adults, the dynamic only worsened. Jada married Spencer, a white real estate developer who drove luxury European cars and loved to brag about his multi-million-dollar commercial projects at every family gathering. My parents practically worshipped Spencer, treating him like royalty while treating my career choices with utter contempt. They genuinely believed I was just an ordinary corporate employee, grinding away in a cubicle, completely unaware that I had spent the last 7 years silently building something massive entirely on my own terms. When I met Julian 6 years ago at a private financial summit in Manhattan, we bonded over our shared drive and mutual desire to keep our personal lives entirely separate from the shallow noise of social media. Julian was a powerhouse in the private equity sector, managing billions in institutional capital, yet he carried himself with an effortless, quiet dignity. We married 2 years later in an intimate, elegant ceremony in Napa Valley. I had sent my parents a formal invitation including plane tickets and hotel reservations. My mother had called me the next day, not to congratulate me, but to complain that the date conflicted with Jada's lavish gender reveal party. "We can't miss Jada's big announcement, Naomi," my mother had said without a hint of hesitation or regret. "You know how delicate she is during pregnancy. You can just sign the marriage papers at the courthouse and celebrate with us another time." I never mentioned the wedding again. I never told them about Julian's massive financial firm, nor did I tell them that the little restructuring job I worked was actually my role as the founder and CEO of Apex Acquisitions, an elite corporate advisory firm specializing in hostile takeovers and debt restructuring. I let my family believe whatever comfortable lie made them feel superior. I let them believe I was a lonely, struggling 35-year-old woman with no prospects. Now, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway toward the dining room, I watched my mother's face pale as the mahogany doors swung open. Julian stepped into the warm glow of the chandeliers, impeccably tailored in a bespoke navy suit, holding a rare 1982 bottle of Chateau Margaux. His striking presence immediately commanded the entire room, radiating the kind of authentic, unshakable power that money could never buy. "Good evening, everyone," Julian said smoothly, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "I apologize for being late. Traffic on the interstate was backed up." He walked straight over to where I sat, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and leaned down to kiss my cheek. "Merry Christmas, my love." My father Marcus stood up so fast his chair screeched loudly against the hardwood floor. He stared at Julian, then at me, his jaw practically dropping to his chest. "Naomi, who is this man?" Before I could answer, Spencer suddenly gasped for air, his face draining of every drop of color until he looked entirely ghostly. He pushed his chair back, scrambling to his feet with a terrifying look of panic in his eyes. He pointed a trembling finger at my husband, his voice shaking violently as he stammered, Mr. Sterling, Julian Sterling." Julian turned his gaze toward Spencer, his expression perfectly calm, cool, and detached. "Hello, Spencer," Julian replied smoothly, taking a seat beside me. "I didn't realize you were part of the family." Vivian looked between Spencer and Julian, her voice tight with rising panic. "Spencer, do you know this man? Who is he?" Spencer swallowed hard, clutching the edge of the dining table as if he were about to collapse right then and there. "Know him, Mom. Mr. Sterling is the chairman of Sterling Capital Group. His private equity firm holds the $15 million mezzanine loan on my entire commercial development downtown." Spencer looked at Julian, his arrogant demeanor completely shattered, replaced by raw, naked terror. "The loan that comes due at the end of this quarter." For 10 years, I sat at the quiet end of our family dining table, the invisible daughter expected to swallow every insult with a grateful smile. Tonight, my sister Jada decided to make me the punchline of our Christmas dinner one last time. "You are already 35 and still single," she sneered, her voice echoing over the clinking crystal. "Must be tough spending the holidays alone." The room erupted into laughter. My mother told me to take a joke, but they had no idea the man pulling into our driveway was about to cost them everything. I set my glass down and looked right into my mother's eyes. "Do not worry about me," I said. "I have been married for a long time." The laughter died instantly. Growing up in Atlanta, my childhood was defined by a rigid hierarchy. My parents, Vivian and Marcus, ran a wine distribution business. From the moment my younger sister Jada was born, she was crowned the golden child. Where I was quiet and dedicated to my studies, Jada was manipulative. When I earned a scholarship, my achievement was barely acknowledged because Jada had just been selected for debutante court. My mother made it clear my duty was to never outshine my sister. As adults, this toxic dynamic worsened. Jada married Spencer, a white real estate developer who bragged about his condo projects at every gathering. My parents worshipped Spencer, treating him like royalty while dismissing my career. They believed I was just an ordinary corporate employee grinding away in a cubicle. They were unaware I had spent the last 7 years building an empire on my own terms. I let them believe I was a lonely, struggling woman with no prospects. Tonight, the dining room was suffocating. The table was dressed in fine china. I sat quietly sipping my water, watching the performance unfold. Jada leaned across the mahogany table, her eyes glinting with malicious delight as she adjusted her bracelet. She took a slow sip of her red wine, ensuring the entire table was paying attention. That was when she delivered her strike about my age and my empty life. As the ripple of laughter washed over the room, Spencer chuckled into his expensive linen napkin. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon, and chimed in with a condescending grin. "Come on," Naomi Spencer mocked. "We all know you spend 70 hours a week at that mid-level office job of yours. Your clock is ticking. What self-respecting man is going to settle down with a woman who has no time to build a real life?" My mother Vivian did not hesitate to enable their cruelty. She patted Jada on the hand, turned to me with an amused smirk, and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, calm down, Naomi," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Jada is just joking. You know she always tells it exactly like it is. You really need to stop being so sensitive and learn to take a little teasing." In that exact second, something fundamental inside me shifted forever. I looked around at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me, seeing their cheap cruelty for what it truly was. The years of biting my tongue evaporated completely. I carefully set my glass down on the crisp white tablecloth. I met my mother's mocking gaze, refusing to break eye contact, and spoke with a quiet, lethal certainty. "Do not worry about me, Mom," I said. "I have been married for a long time." My mother froze mid-toast. Her wine glass hovered inches from her mouth. The laughter in the room died so abruptly it felt as though the air had been sucked out of the space. Jada scoffed, her smug smile faltering for a fraction of a second before her face twisted back into a look of absolute disdain. "Married," Jada spat out, rolling her eyes. "To who exactly, Naomi? Did you hire an actor on the internet just to save face at Christmas dinner? You expect us to believe that you managed to find a husband and hide him from your own family. You are pathetic." My husband Julian was not just any man. He was a titan in the private equity sector, a man whose quiet power commanded boardrooms and terrified weak executives. We had met at a closed-door financial summit in Manhattan and bonded over our mutual desire to keep our personal lives fiercely private. We married in a small, elegant ceremony in Napa Valley. I had sent my family invitations, but my mother had thrown hers away, claiming she could not miss Jada's gender reveal party for a basic courthouse wedding. She told me to just send pictures. So I kept Julian and my corporate success completely separated from their toxic world. I allowed them to keep their delusions because it kept my real life untainted. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer a single word of panicked defense. I simply lifted my left wrist and casually adjusted my cuff. As I did, the warm chandelier light caught the face of my custom Cartier watch, a subtle detail of true wealth that my status-obsessed family was far too blind to ever notice. I looked back up at my mother, ignoring my sister's frantic attempts to regain control of the room. Before anyone else could utter another insult, the heavy brass chime of the front doorbell rang through the mansion. The deep, resonant sound shattered the tense silence, causing my mother to jump slightly in her seat. Everyone instinctively turned their heads toward the grand foyer, their expressions a mixture of confusion and sudden, unexplainable dread. I smoothed my napkin over my lap, feeling profound peace settle over my shoulders. The years of being the family scapegoat were officially over. The door was opening, and with it the truth they could never handle. "He parked the car," I said. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Spencer stared at my husband as if Julian had just materialized from thin air to rip the soul right out of his chest. His arrogant posture vanished in an instant. He was visibly sweating. The $15 million loan was the guillotine hanging over Spencer's entire life, and the man holding the rope was standing right in my parents' dining room. Julian did not break eye contact. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and took the empty seat beside me. He placed the bottle of wine on the table. "Yes, Spencer," Julian said. "The loan comes due at the end of the quarter." My father. Marcus cleared his throat, his eyes darting frantically between Julian and Spencer. The man they had just assumed was a hired actor was actually a financial heavyweight who held their golden child's husband in the palm of his hand. Instantly, my father's entire demeanor transformed. "Well," Marcus stammered quickly. "Julian, welcome to our home. Naomi, why did you not tell us you married someone so distinguished?" My mother Vivian recovered just as fast, suddenly beaming with maternal pride. "Oh, Julian," Vivian cooed. "We are thrilled to meet you. Naomi has always been so secretive. You must forgive our surprise. We are family now. Let Marcus pour you a drink." I watched my parents shamelessly pivot from humiliating me to fawning over my husband. They only cared about the wealth and the immense corporate power sitting right next to me. I had spent my entire life trying to be seen by them, but I was invisible. Now they looked at Julian like he was a king, and they were his loyal subjects, ready to offer up anything to gain his favor and save their own miserable status in society. Spencer swallowed hard. He looked at Jada, who was staring at Julian with wide, panicked eyes. Spencer wiped his forehead and leaned forward, his voice shaking with desperation. "Julian, since we are family now, maybe we could talk about that mezzanine loan. The interest rates are strangling my project. If Sterling Capital could just give me a 12-month extension, or maybe restructure the debt, we could figure something out." Vivian immediately nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly. Naomi, honey, tell your husband to help out your brother-in-law. Family helps family, right? We look out for our own." I picked up my fork and took a slow bite of my roasted vegetables. I chewed, swallowed, and gently dabbed my mouth with my napkin. The entire table watched me like I held oxygen, and they were drowning. "No," I said calmly. My voice did not shake. I did not raise it above a normal conversational volume, but it echoed in the silence of the room. Vivian blinked, her fake smile faltering. "Excuse me?" she whispered. I said no. I repeated, turning to look at my mother. "My marriage is a partnership built on mutual respect. It is not a charity for Spencer's terrible investments. Julian runs a private equity firm, not a familial bailout fund. I do not mix my personal life with your financial failures." Jada slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "You manipulative witch!" Jada screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You planned this. You hid him from us for years, just so you could bring him here tonight to ruin my life. You have always been jealous of me, Naomi. You are just trying to destroy my marriage because you are bitter." "Jealous of what, Jada?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. "Jealous of a man who builds empty luxury condos with money he does not have. You spend your days flaunting designer bags while your husband begs my husband for a lifeline at the Christmas dinner table. I am not ruining your marriage, Jada. Your own greed is doing that perfectly well without my help." Jada let out a breathless sob, burying her face in her hands. Spencer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear forever. Julian sat quietly beside me, watching the chaos with mild amusement. He did not say a single word because he knew he did not need to. He trusted me to handle my own battles. My mother pushed her chair back and stood up, her face twisting with furious indignation. The sweet fawning mother routine vanished completely, replaced by the controlling tyrant I had known my entire life. "Naomi Williams." Vivian snapped, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "You will listen to me right now. You are going to tell Julian to extend Spencer's loan. You are going to fix this tonight. We are your parents and you owe us your loyalty. If you do not do this, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." I tilted my head, resting my hands on the table. "And how exactly are you going to do that, Mom? You have never given me anything to take away in the first place." Vivian's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "The family business, Naomi Williams Estate. You currently hold a 20% minority shareholder voting right. I have let you keep those shares out of the goodness of my heart. But if you do not cooperate and save your sister, I will call the family lawyers tomorrow morning. I will strip you of every single share. I will legally cut you out of this family business entirely, and you will not see a single dime of our legacy. You will be left with absolutely nothing. I looked at Vivian, taking in her desperate threat. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked at Julian and he returned a knowing glance. They truly had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they still held all the cards. But they were about to finally learn that I actually owned the entire deck, and the game was already over. This was only the beginning of their nightmare. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound of my amusement cut through the heavy tension in the dining room like a blade. My mother stared at me, her hand still pointing mid-air, her mouth slightly open in shock. She had expected me to cower. She had expected me to beg for my share of the Williams estate inheritance, just as I had begged for her approval my entire life. Instead, I was laughing. "Are you out of your mind?" Vivian snapped, dropping her hand. "I just told you I am stripping you of your inheritance and you are laughing at me." "I am laughing because you are threatening to take away something that no longer exists, Mom," I said. My voice was calm and measured. "You cannot cut me out of the family business. You cannot strip me of my shares. And you certainly cannot use the Williams estate to intimidate me anymore." My father Marcus finally found his voice. "What are you talking about, Naomi? The business is perfectly fine. We just had our best quarter in 3 years. You had your best quarter in sales," I corrected him. "But your balance sheet is a completely different story. Tell me, Dad, when was the last time you actually looked at the holding company documents? When was the last time you checked the corporate ledger without letting Jada summarize the reports for you?" Marcus frowned, looking over at Jada. Jada was suddenly gripping the edge of the dining table so tightly her knuckles had turned completely white. The confident, mocking golden child from 20 minutes ago was gone. In her place sat a terrified woman whose house of cards was rapidly collapsing. "Naomi, shut up." Jada hissed, her voice trembling. "Do not say another word. This is family business." "This is my business," I replied smoothly. "Mom just threatened my 20% voting rights, so I think it is only fair we discuss the current valuation of those rights." I turned my attention back to my parents. 6 months ago, Jada came to you and said she needed to restructure some internal accounts to optimize the company tax strategy. You signed the paperwork because you always trust Jada. You never read what you sign when she hands it to you. Vivian looked back and forth between me and Jada. "Jada, what is she talking about?" "She used your signatures to illegally leverage the entire Williams estate as collateral," I explained, dropping the truth directly onto the center of the table. Jada took out a $5 million shadow loan from an unregulated high-interest private lender. She did not use that money for the business. She used it to fund her luxury trips to Europe, her new cars, and to quietly pump cash into Spencer's failing real estate developments. She mortgaged the legacy of this family to pay for her fake billionaire lifestyle. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked at Jada, his face pale and stricken. "Jada, tell me this is a lie," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "Tell me you did not mortgage the business." Jada burst into theatrical tears. It was an instant, rehearsed reaction. She covered her face, sobbing loudly and dramatically. "It was supposed to be a temporary liquidity bridge," she cried, peering through her fingers. "Spencer just needed a little bit of cash to finish the framing on his luxury condos. Once the units sold, we were going to pay the loan right back. The interest rates just got too high too fast. We were trying to protect the family image. We could not let people think we were struggling." I watched her perform the victim role with absolute disgust. She had committed federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement, yet she was trying to spin it as a noble sacrifice for the family reputation. Spencer sat beside her, staring at the floor, completely useless and utterly defeated. I expected my parents to explode with rage. I expected Marcus to demand Jada hand over her keys and credit cards. I expected Vivian to finally see her golden child for the selfish, destructive parasite she truly was. But the toxic dynamics of my family were rooted far too deep for logic or accountability to ever take hold. Instead of screaming at Jada, my father took a deep breath, walked over to her, and gently placed a hand on her shaking shoulder. "It is okay, sweetie," Marcus murmured softly. "We will figure this out. We always figure it out." I stared at them in pure disbelief. "She just stole your entire company," I said. "She committed fraud." "She made a mistake," Naomi Vivian snapped, turning her vicious glare back to me. "Her husband is under a lot of pressure, and she was trying to be a supportive wife. You would not understand that because you have always been selfish." I could not believe what I was hearing. They were actually defending her. But the absolute peak of their delusion was yet to come. Marcus straightened his posture and looked directly at Julian. "Julian," my father said, trying to summon a tone of patriarchal authority, "you are part of this family now. You have resources. You are going to write a check tomorrow morning to clear Jada's shadow loan and release the lien on the Williams estate. Then you are going to forgive Spencer's $15 million debt. It is the least you can do for your new family." Julian did not blink. He simply looked at my father as if Marcus were an interesting insect on the sidewalk. He did not say a word. He just waited for my response. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. I looked at Marcus and Vivian, feeling the last remaining microscopic thread of familial obligations snap and dissolve into nothing. "You want my husband to pay $20 million to clean up the criminal mess your golden child created?" I asked, my voice echoing with cold finality. "You want us to bail out the sister who spent this entire evening humiliating me while you cheered her on?" "You are going to do it because you are blood," Vivian demanded, crossing her arms. "Or you are dead to us." I picked up my evening bag from the back of my chair. "Then consider me dead, Mom, because we are not giving you a single dime." Jada let out a fresh wail of manufactured agony. Marcus took a step forward, his face red with sudden panic as the reality of my refusal hit him. "Naomi, you cannot just walk out of here. If the shadow lender calls in that loan, we lose the business. We lose the house. We lose everything. You have to save us." Julian stood up gracefully, buttoning his suit jacket with effortless precision. He placed his hand on the small of my back, a silent, steady pillar of support. "I do not have to do anything, Dad," I said, walking around the table toward the foyer. "You chose your favorite daughter. Now you can choose to go bankrupt with her." We walked out the front doors of the mansion, stepping into the crisp winter night air. Behind us, I could hear the muffled sounds of absolute chaos erupting in the dining room. Jada's sobbing, Vivian's hysterical screaming, and Spencer's frantic pacing. We got into Julian's waiting car, leaving them to drown in the panic of their own devastating making. Word travels fast in Atlanta's elite circles, but lies travel at the speed of light. By Tuesday morning, my phone was blowing up with the fallout of my family's desperation. Jada and Spencer realized they could not intimidate me in private, so they decided to destroy me in public. They launched a vicious smear campaign designed to completely discredit my character before the truth about their financial crimes could ever come to light. Spencer hit the country club circuit. He sat in the locker rooms and cigar lounges with his wealthy real estate buddies, spinning a narrative of pure delusion. He told them I was a mentally unstable gold digger who had manipulated Julian into marriage. He claimed I had a long history of psychiatric breakdowns and that Julian was secretly looking for a way out of the relationship. Jada took to her charity luncheon group texts and high society circles. She told the women who ran the local galas that I had been cut off from the family years ago for stealing. She actually had the nerve to claim that the missing money from the Williams estate, the money she had stolen, was money I had embezzled to buy designer clothes and trap a rich husband. They wanted to paint me as a toxic liability. They thought if they humiliated me enough, if they made Julian's investors question his judgment in marrying me, I would crumble. They expected me to panic, call them in tears, and offer to pay Spencer's debts just to make the nasty rumors stop. The calls poured in. I received voicemails from distant aunts praying for my mental health. I got texts from society wives expressing fake concern while fishing for gossip. They all expected a reaction. They expected a breakdown. I did not shed a single tear. I did not post a frantic defense on social media. I simply put my phone on silent, finished my morning espresso, and stepped into my waiting car. My driver dropped me off at a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. The private elevator whisked me up to the 50th floor. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling, immaculate office space. Behind the sleek reception desk, brushed chrome letters spelled out Apex Acquisitions. This was my domain. While my family spent their days pretending to be rich on the internet, I had spent the last 7 years building a ruthless corporate restructuring empire. The atmosphere was electric with quiet precision. I walked past rows of brilliant analysts and junior partners who nodded respectfully as I passed. I stepped into my corner office, tossing my coat onto a leather chair. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the very city Spencer was currently trying to poison against me. He was playing a petty high school gossip game. He had no idea I was about to unleash a corporate execution. I pressed the button on my desk intercom. Send in Marcus from legal and David from forensic accounting immediately. Within 2 minutes, my top attorney and my lead financial investigator were sitting across from my custom marble desk. They had their tablets ready, expecting me to discuss our latest corporate buyout. Instead, I slid a sleek black folder across the table. Inside that folder are the public registry documents for Spencer Dexter's commercial real estate limited liability companies. I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I want a complete deep dive forensic audit on every single one of them. Do not just look at the surface ledgers. Dig into the shell companies, find the holding accounts, track every single subcontractor invoice and tax filing for the last 36 months. David, my lead accountant, adjusted his glasses and looked at the files. Are we looking for something specific, Naomi? I leaned forward, folding my hands on the desk. You are looking for commingled funds. You are looking for unregulated shadow loans. I want to know exactly where the capital from the Williams estate was funneled to prop up his failing luxury condo project. Spencer is arrogant, which means he is sloppy. Jada is desperate, which means she left a paper trail. Find the wire transfers. Find the fraudulent collateral documents. My legal counsel Marcus raised an eyebrow. If we find evidence of commingling family assets with corporate loans without proper board disclosure, we are looking at federal wire fraud. We are looking at massive corporate embezzlement. I looked out the window toward the skyline, where Spencer's half-finished condo building sat stalling under the weight of its own toxic debt. Exactly, I replied, turning back to my team. They think they can burn my name to save their own skin. I want every single piece of financial evidence verified, stamped, and ready for presentation by Friday afternoon. Leave no stone unturned. My team nodded, recognizing the absolute finality in my tone. They gathered the files and walked out of the office, immediately getting to work. I sat back in my chair, picking up my phone to see another fake, concerned text message from my mother asking if I needed a psychological evaluation. I deleted the message with a cool smile. They thought they were dealing with the helpless scapegoat daughter they could push around forever. They were about to find out exactly what happens when you try to bluff a woman who owns the entire casino. The New Year's Eve charity gala in Manhattan was the crown jewel of the city's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the billionaires and titans of industry who gathered to celebrate. Julian and I arrived exactly at 9. I wore a custom emerald gown that caught the flash of the cameras, while Julian looked flawless in his tailored tuxedo. We were not just attendees. Sterling Capital was the primary sponsor of the event. We were ushered immediately to the VIP section, where the most influential investors in the country were waiting to speak with my husband and, by extension, me. For the first 2 hours, the evening was absolute perfection. We sipped vintage champagne and discussed global market trends with hedge fund managers who shaped the global economy. Nobody cared about the petty country club rumors Spencer had tried to spread down in Atlanta. In this room, power spoke louder than gossip. But desperation has a way of making people do very stupid things. I saw them before they saw me. Jada and Spencer were pushing their way through the heavy velvet doors of the ballroom. They did not have invitations. They had crashed the event using Spencer's dwindling credit to bribe a junior event coordinator at the door. Jada was wearing a gaudy sequined dress that tried far too hard to look expensive while Spencer was sweating through his stiff collar. They looked frantic. They looked like two drowning people searching for a life raft to drag down with them. Julian noticed my gaze shift. He followed my line of sight, and a cold, silent recognition passed between us. My family had actually followed me to New York. They were so blinded by their own panic that they thought they could ambush me in front of the most powerful people in the city. Jada spotted me standing near the center ice sculpture, her eyes locked onto mine with a manic, desperate energy. She grabbed Spencer's arm and dragged him through the crowd, shoving past corporate executives and their wives. She was clutching a thick manila folder to her chest like a weapon. I was in a conversation with Richard Vance, the senior partner at a massive international banking firm. Jada did not care. She shoved her way into our circle, completely ignoring the unspoken rules of high society etiquette. "Naomi," she shouted. Her shrill voice pierced through the elegant jazz music playing in the background. The conversation around us ground to a halt. Richard raised his eyebrows in distaste. Several other investors turned their heads, their champagne flutes paused mid-air. Jada stopped right in front of me, panting slightly. She shoved the manila folder directly into my face. "You thought you could run away to New York and hide behind your rich husband?" She sneered loudly, ensuring everyone within a 50-foot radius could hear her. "You thought you could just leave us to deal with your mess, but I am not letting you get away with it." Spencer stepped up beside her, trying to puff out his chest and look intimidating. He pointed a finger at Julian. "You need to look at these documents, Julian. You need to see exactly who you married. She is a fraud." I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not step back. I did not flinch. "Jada, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low and perfectly calm. "I am exposing you," Jada yelled. She ripped open the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, waving them in the air like a deranged street preacher. "I have the bank records right here. I have the proof. Everyone needs to know that Naomi Williams is a thief. She embezzled $2 million from our family business 5 years ago. She drained the Williams estate accounts to buy designer clothes and fund her luxurious lifestyle. She used our family money to trap a billionaire husband." The ballroom grew unnervingly quiet. The whispers started immediately. The wealthy investors exchanged shocked glances. In their world, financial fraud was the ultimate sin. A scandal like this could destroy a reputation overnight. Jada fed on their reaction. Her chest heaved with triumphant pride. She truly believed she had just delivered the killing blow. "She is a mentally unstable gold digger," Spencer added, raising his voice for the crowd. "She stole from her own parents. She is a liability, Julian. You need to divorce her before she drains your accounts, too." Jada thrust the forged financial documents toward Richard and the other investors. "Look at the signatures," she pleaded desperately. "Look at the transfer logs. She is a criminal. My parents covered it up to protect her, but we refused to stay silent any longer." The tension in the VIP section was thick enough to choke on. The investors looked at Julian, waiting to see how the titan of private equity would handle this massive public humiliation. They expected him to snatch the papers. They expected him to look betrayed. They expected him to pull me aside and demand an explanation. Julian did none of those things. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look angry. He slowly took a sip of his champagne. Then he let out a soft, deep chuckle that sent a shiver of absolute terror down Spencer's spine. Julian casually handed his glass to a passing waiter. He stepped back, creating a physical space between himself and the confrontation. He did not defend me because he knew stepping in would make me look weak. He looked at Jada and Spencer with a gaze of pure, frozen pity. Then he looked at me and offered a slight, respectful nod. He was stepping aside to let his wife handle her business. I turned my attention back to my sister. She was holding forged documents, trying to frame me for the exact crime she had committed. The trap was set perfectly. I just smiled. Naomi adjusts her silk evening gown and steps smoothly toward Jada. The ballroom is dead silent. Every investor, every socialite, and every media representative holds their breath. Jada stands triumphant, thrusting the crumpled bank statements into the air, a smug grin plastered across her face. Spencer stands behind her, sweating profusely in a rented tuxedo, trying to look intimidating. "Are you finished, Jada?" Naomi asks, her voice echoing clearly across the marble floor. She does not raise her voice. She does not look angry. She looks amused. Naomi reaches out and delicately takes the documents from Jada's trembling hand. She scans the top page, lets out a soft chuckle, and turns to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Naomi announces, projecting her voice effortlessly, "my sister claims these papers show I embezzled $3 million from our family's estate 5 years ago. It is a fascinating story. However, there is a minor flaw in her narrative." Naomi holds the paper up to the light. This bank statement is dated August 2021. It shows a transfer from the Williams Family Trust to an offshore account. But as my husband's lead investors here might know, the Williams Family Trust was legally dissolved in 2019. I know this because I was the one who liquidated it to pay off the massive gambling debts my sister accumulated in Macau. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Jada's face drains of color. She lunges to snatch the papers back, but Naomi sidesteps her with practiced grace. "That is a lie," Jada shrieks, her voice cracking. "You stole that money, Spencer, tell them." Spencer shifts uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. The investors are no longer whispering about Naomi. They are staring at Jada with undisguised contempt. Naomi signals to the event's audiovisual director, a man she had tipped generously earlier in the evening. The massive projector screen behind the gala's main stage flashes to life. Instead of the charity logo, a high-resolution image of a foreclosure notice appears. "Since we are airing family finances tonight," Naomi says, walking toward the stage, "I thought it would be the perfect time to make a little announcement. Spencer, your tech startup has been operating on fumes for the last 8 months. You crashed this VIP gala hoping to corner my husband's investors and beg for a bailout." Spencer takes a step back, looking as though he might be sick. Jada stares at the screen in horror. Naomi continues, her tone razor sharp. "What you did not realize is that the holding company that bought your debt last week belongs to me. I own your company, Spencer. And as of this morning, I have officially dissolved it." Jada turns to Spencer, hitting his chest with her fists. "What is she talking about? You said we were closing a Series B round. You said we were rich." "We are bankrupt, Jada," Spencer mutters, refusing to meet her eyes. "We have nothing." The humiliation is absolute. Jada looks around the ballroom, searching for a sympathetic face, but she finds only judgment. The elite circle she so desperately wanted to impress is now watching her public downfall. Julian finally steps forward, wrapping a protective, loving arm around Naomi's waist. He signals to the ballroom security. 2 large guards in sharp black suits immediately flank Jada and Spencer. "It is time for you to leave," Naomi says softly, looking directly into her sister's panicked eyes. "You wanted to make a scene, Jada. You wanted everyone to know who the real fraud is. Congratulations, mission accomplished." As the guards escort a sobbing Jada and a defeated Spencer toward the service elevators, the ballroom erupts into spontaneous applause. The investors flock to Naomi and Julian, their respect for Naomi's ruthless business acumen solidifying instantly. She had not only protected her reputation, but had dominated her enemies with undeniable proof and flawless execution. Naomi accepts a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, clinking it against Julian's glass. She had spent years swallowing her pride and taking the blame for her family's toxic behavior. Tonight, she had finally severed the chains. The revenge is indeed sweet. But just as she takes her first sip, Julian's phone vibrates with an emergency alert. He looks at the screen, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "Naomi," Julian whispers, pulling her away from the crowd. "Your mother just called. She said Jada did not act alone tonight. Someone on my board gave her those forged documents." Naomi's smile fades as she scans the smiling faces of the investors around her. The war with her sister is over, but the betrayal inside her own empire has just begun. "You want me to confess to federal wire fraud?" Naomi says, her voice eerily calm as it cuts through the heavy silence of her corner office. Marcus and Vivian sit across from her sleek mahogany desk, refusing to meet her gaze directly. Vivian adjusts her silk scarf, her hands fluttering nervously. "It would not be real prison time for you, Naomi." Vivian pleads, her tone adopting that familiar cloying sweetness she always used when demanding unreasonable sacrifices. Julian has the most expensive lawyers in the city. They could negotiate it down to probation, maybe a fine. You have a spotless record. But Jada is not built for this. A felony conviction would absolutely destroy her. Marcus leans forward, resting his forearms on the desk, trying to invoke the patriarchal authority he had wielded over Naomi her entire life. We are asking you to be a team player. You have your billionaire husband, your penthouses, your status. Jada has lost her company. Spencer is filing for bankruptcy. If she goes to federal prison, she will not survive it. You are the strong one, Naomi. You can handle a little white-collar charge. Naomi stares at the two people who raised her. For years, she had internalized their toxic dynamic, convincing herself that if she simply worked harder, achieved more, and caused fewer problems, they would eventually love her the way they loved Jada. Looking at them now, asking her to sacrifice her freedom, her marriage, and her unblemished reputation to save the sister who had maliciously tried to destroy her just 12 hours prior, the final illusion shatters. She does not feel anger. She feels absolute liberating indifference. Naomi reaches across her desk and presses a button on her intercom system. Sarah, please send security to my office. We have 2 guests who are leaving. Marcus stands abruptly, his face flushing dark red. Do not you dare call security on your own parents. We are telling you what needs to be done. You owe this family. I owe this family absolutely nothing, Naomi replies, standing to face him. She is shorter than her father, but in this room she commands all the power. But since we are balancing the scales today, let us discuss your immediate future. She opens a file drawer and pulls out a thick leather-bound folder, dropping it onto the desk between them. Did you honestly think I only audited Jada's accounts? Naomi asks, her voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. When I traced the embezzled $3 million, I tracked every single wire transfer. I know exactly where the money went. She opens the folder, pointing to highlighted bank statements. Exhibit A, $200,000 funneled into your personal shell company to pay off Dad's bad real estate investments. Exhibit B, $50,000 to cover the property taxes on the Hamptons house you swore you paid off years ago. Exhibit C, $100,000 to cover Mom's private shopping tabs in Paris. Vivian pales, her hand flying to her mouth. Naomi, we did not know where Jada got that money. She said her startup was doing well. You knew exactly what she was doing, Naomi counters coldly. You knew she was forging my name to drain the remaining trust accounts, and you took your cut to fund a lifestyle you can no longer afford. You are accessories to wire fraud. The office door opens and 2 broad-shouldered security guards step inside, waiting silently by the entrance. I am officially cutting all personal and financial ties with you, Naomi states, looking directly into her father's panicked eyes. You have 30 days to vacate the Beacon Hill property. The deed was leveraged against Jada's company last year, the same company I now own and have liquidated. The house belongs to me, and I am putting it on the market. If you try to contact me, Julian, or anyone associated with my firm again, I will hand this entire folder over to the district attorney. You cannot do this to us, Vivian sobs, reaching out. We are your parents. You were Jada's parents, Naomi says, stepping back from the desk. I was just your collateral damage. Escort them out. As the guards guide a sputtering Marcus and a weeping Vivian out of the office, Naomi does not look back. She closes the folder, takes a deep breath, and immediately dials Julian's private line. The familial dead weight has been severed, but the war inside their empire requires her immediate attention. Julian, she says the moment he answers, it is time to deal with Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance, the senior board member who had supplied Jada with the forged financial documents, had severely underestimated his opponents. He had orchestrated the entire gala confrontation, hoping the scandal would force Julian to step down as CEO, allowing Arthur to execute a hostile takeover. 2 hours later, Arthur sits in the main boardroom nursing a glass of scotch, waiting for an emergency meeting he had called to discuss leadership liabilities. He smiles smugly as Julian walks through the double glass doors. But Julian does not look defeated. He looks dangerously serene, and he is not alone. Naomi walks in right behind him, followed by the company's chief legal counsel and two men wearing dark suits and federal badges. Arthur, Julian says smoothly, taking his seat at the head of the table. You called an emergency meeting, but I think my wife has the floor. Naomi tosses a flash drive onto the polished mahogany table directly in front of Arthur. That drive contains the digital footprints of every encrypted email you sent to my sister, Naomi says. It also contains the offshore routing numbers you used to short this company's stock 48 hours before you handed Jada those forged documents. You engaged in corporate espionage, insider trading, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Arthur's smug smile vanishes. He looks at the federal agents, his face draining of color. This is absurd. You have no proof. I am a senior partner here. You were a senior partner, Julian corrects him coldly. The board held a proxy vote 10 minutes ago. You have been terminated effectively immediately. These gentlemen are here to escort you to a holding cell. Arthur stands his chair, scraping loudly against the floor, but the federal agents are already moving in, reciting his rights as they secure his wrists. As he is marched out of the glass-walled boardroom in full view of the executive floor, Naomi and Julian stand side by side watching the final piece of the betrayal being swept away. 6 months later, the dust has completely settled. Jada and Spencer, unable to secure high-priced legal representation, accepted a plea deal, resulting in 36 months in federal prison for wire fraud and forgery. Marcus and Vivian, stripped of their stolen assets and public dignity, downsized to a small rented condominium in a working-class neighborhood, their social standing permanently eradicated. Naomi stands on the terrace of her Manhattan penthouse, holding a glass of vintage champagne, watching the city lights glitter against the night sky. Julian wraps his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. She had spent a lifetime shrinking herself to fit into a family that only valued her as a scapegoat. Now she looks out over an empire she helped secure, completely free, unapologetically powerful, and surrounded by the only family she ever truly needed. The man sitting across from Naomi reeks of cheap cologne and unearned confidence. Richard Sterling, the Williams family's longtime attorney, slides a single sheet of paper across the sleek glass surface of Naomi's desk. He leans back, crossing his legs with a self-satisfied smirk. It is a standard waiver, Naomi, Richard says, gesturing loosely to the document. Your parents are finalizing the sale of Williams' estate to Apex Acquisitions. They are offering you $10,000 for your 20% minority share. Sign on the dotted line and you walk away with a nice little bonus. Naomi does not touch the pen he places beside the paper. She picks up the document, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with practiced precision. $10,000, Naomi repeats, her voice dangerously flat. For a 20% stake in a company my parents are desperately trying to offload for $10 million. That means my shares are mathematically valued at $2 million. You are offering me a fraction of a penny on the dollar. Richard chuckles, an irritating, patronizing sound. Let us be realistic here. Your 20% is non-controlling. It carries no real market value unless the majority shareholders agree to a buyout. Your parents are doing you a favor by offering anything at all. Williams' estate is drowning in debt thanks to Jada's little missteps. If you block this sale, the company goes into receivership and you get absolutely nothing. Take the 10 grand, Naomi. Be a good daughter for once. Naomi sets the paper down. She looks at Richard, analyzing the slight bead of sweat forming at his hairline. He is pushing too hard. He needs this signature today, which means Marcus and Vivian are entirely out of time. You missed a crucial detail during your due diligence, Richard, Naomi says, lacing her fingers together. I assure you my firm is thorough, Richard replies defensively. Naomi reaches over and taps a button on her desk console. Julian, are you available? Always for you. Julian's voice fills the office through the crisp speaker system. I have Richard Sterling here, Naomi says, keeping her eyes locked on the lawyer. He brought me a waiver. It seems my parents are trying to sell Williams' estate to a conglomerate called Apex Acquisitions for $10 million to cover Jada's embezzlement. A low, resonant laugh echoes from the speaker. Apex Acquisitions. Are you absolutely certain, Naomi? It is printed right here on the contract, she replies. Richard sits up straighter, looking between the speaker and Naomi. I do not see what your husband has to do with a private transaction between you and your parents. He has everything to do with it, Naomi states coldly. Tell him, Julian. Richard. Julian begins, his tone shifting from amused husband to ruthless corporate titan. Apex Acquisitions is a mid-level holding entity. If you had bothered to trace its corporate registry past the Cayman Islands routing, you would have discovered that it is a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Financial, my firm. All the color drains from Richard's face. He stares at the speaker, his mouth slightly open. Naomi picks up the settlement agreement and deliberately tears it in half, then in half again, dropping the pieces into the wastebasket beside her desk. Your clients, Naomi explains, her voice dropping to an icy whisper, just handed their entire financial playbook, their desperate valuation, and their admission of impending bankruptcy directly to my husband. You came into my office to bully me out of my voting rights so you could sell my family's legacy to the very empire I help run. Richard scrambles to stand, grabbing his briefcase with shaking hands. This is a conflict of interest. We will find another buyer. We will take this to the open market. There is no open market, Julian interjects through the speaker. The moment this meeting ends, I am officially withdrawing the $10 million acquisition offer from Apex. Furthermore, I will be flagging Williams' estate as a toxic asset across every major financial network. No legitimate buyer will touch your clients with a 10-foot pole. The sale is dead. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave my office, Naomi tells Richard, standing up to meet his panicked gaze. Go back to my parents. Tell them their golden child is going to federal prison and their company is going to the highest bidder in bankruptcy court. Tell them they have officially run out of moves. Richard does not say another word. He practically runs for the door, abandoning his patronizing swagger entirely. When the door clicks shut, Naomi lets out a long, steady breath. She walks over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. The afternoon sun reflects off the glass skyscrapers, mirroring the brilliant, blinding clarity of her victory. Are you all right? Julian asks softly over the intercom. I am better than all right, Naomi replies, a genuine smile touching her lips. They tried one last time to make me the sacrificial lamb. They truly believed I was stupid enough to sign away my leverage. They underestimated you, Julian says. Just as they always have. What is your next move? We let them bleed, Naomi answers without hesitation. Without the Apex money, Jada's creditors will close in by Friday. The authorities will follow shortly after. Marcus and Vivian will be forced to liquidate everything they own just to afford their legal fees. And Williams' estate. Let it go into receivership, Naomi says, resting her hand against the cool glass of the window. Once the debt is stripped away and the assets are auctioned off for pennies, I will buy it back under a new LLC. I will tear down the company my father built on favoritism and lies, and I will rebuild it on my own terms. The Williams name is dead. From now on, it belongs to me. A flawless strategy, Julian murmurs approvingly. I will have my legal team monitor the bankruptcy filings. The moment it hits the docket, we strike. Naomi ends the call. She looks down at the bustling city below, feeling lighter than she has in 30 years. The illusion of her family's wealth and superiority had been violently shattered. The parents who had constantly told her she was not enough were now facing total destitution, orchestrated entirely by their own arrogance. She had not just beaten them. She had dismantled them using the very tools they tried to use against her. The revenge is complete, elegant, and utterly devastating. The heavy manila envelope arrives on Naomi's desk precisely at 8 the next morning. Despite Julian entirely blacklisting Williams' estate from legitimate financial markets, desperation is a powerful motivator. Marcus and Vivian had somehow managed to find a bottom-feeding private equity firm willing to acquire the family company for a severely depressed valuation. It is a fire sale designed strictly to generate enough cash to pay off Jada's creditors and keep her out of a federal penitentiary. But the core obstacle remains. The sale cannot proceed unless Naomi formally surrenders her 20% minority voting rights. Naomi carries the pristine document down to Vanguard Financial's elite legal department. She drops the contract onto the sleek slate table in front of Evelyn Hayes, the firm's most ruthless acquisitions attorney. Evelyn adjusts her glasses, her eyes scanning the dense paragraphs with mechanical precision. The room is perfectly silent for 10 minutes, then a slow, predatory smile spreads across Evelyn's face. Evelyn taps a manicured fingernail against the fourth page. Richard Sterling was in such a frantic rush to bypass Vanguard's blockade that he copy-pasted a boilerplate buyout template. He entirely forgot to include a successor liability protection clause. It is a catastrophic legal blunder. By signing this specific waiver, Naomi would indeed surrender her shares for the insulting sum of $10,000. However, without that protection clause, the new buyers will not absorb the company's hidden liabilities. Instead, the moment the acquisition goes through and the inevitable audit reveals the true depth of Jada's embezzlement, the corporate veil will shatter. The Williams family will become personally liable for the millions of dollars in federal restitution. Furthermore, signing the document completely immunizes Naomi from the upcoming legal blast radius. Naomi absorbs the magnitude of this mistake. Her parents are so blinded by their need to save their golden child that they have handed Naomi the exact weapon needed to annihilate them. She does not hesitate. She picks up her phone and dials her father's private number. When Marcus answers, his tone is predictably hostile, demanding to know if she has finally decided to stop being difficult. Naomi takes a slow breath, forcing her voice to tremble slightly. She softens her posture, lowering her shoulders, even though she is alone in the room, projecting the exact image of the defeated, exhausted daughter they have always wanted her to be. She tells her father that she is tired of the war. She tells him that she realizes she cannot beat the family, that Julian is unhappy with the public drama, and that she just wants to wash her hands of the entire situation. The performance is flawless. She can practically hear Marcus swelling with patriarchal pride on the other end of the line. He immediately adopts a patronizing tone, praising her for finally acting like a team player and putting the family's needs first. He promises to have Richard Sterling waiting in the Vanguard lobby within the hour. When Naomi steps off the private elevator into the expansive marble lobby, Richard is already there, clutching his leather briefcase. His previous panic has vanished, replaced by a nauseatingly triumphant smirk. He clearly believes his aggressive tactics from the day before finally broke her resolve. He slides the waiver across the glass coffee table, capping his expensive pen and holding it out to her. Naomi hesitates. She looks down at the paper, letting her hand shake just enough to be visible. She bites her lower lip, staring at the pathetic $10,000 figure printed on the buyout agreement. She allows Richard to bask in her fabricated humiliation for a full 60 seconds. Then, with a heavy, resigned sigh, she signs her name on the dotted line. Richard snatches the document back almost before the ink is dry. He carelessly tosses a certified bank check for $10,000 onto the table. He tells her it is a pleasure doing business and practically sprints out the revolving doors, eager to deliver his unearned victory to Marcus and Vivian. Naomi watches him leave, the trembling in her hands vanishing instantly. She picks up the check, studying the insignificant numbers. For 30 years, this was exactly what her family thought she was worth. A convenient scapegoat to be bought off with loose change, while they poured their actual wealth into Jada's endless failures. She steps back into the private elevator and returns to her penthouse office. The moment she sits behind her desk, her phone chimes with a notification. It is a text message from Jada. Naomi opens the message. A high-resolution photo loads on the screen. Jada is lounging on a pristine white cabana bed at a luxury resort, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding a crystal champagne flute toward the camera. Her smile is radiant, utterly devoid of any remorse for the financial crimes that brought their family to the brink of ruin. The caption underneath the photo reads with toxic clarity, "Enjoy your pennies, loser. Mom and Dad just secured the buyout. I am about to be a multimillionaire again while you get nothing. You will always be second place." Naomi stares at the screen. She does not feel a single ounce of anger. There is no lingering sadness, no lingering desire to ever be accepted by these people. Instead, a deep, resonant laugh escapes her throat. The sheer arrogance of her sister is genuinely entertaining. Jada is celebrating on the deck of a sinking ship, completely unaware that the lifeboats have already been burned. Naomi types a simple, polite reply. Congratulations, Jada. Enjoy the celebration. She sets her phone face down on the mahogany desk. She picks up the certified copy of the waiver Richard so graciously left behind and walks directly into the adjacent boardroom where her acquisitions team is waiting. Julian sits at the head of the table, his dark eyes tracking her confident movements. Naomi drops the signed waiver onto the center of the table. She issues her orders with absolute cold precision. The trap is officially armed. She instructs her team to let the Williams family finalize the sale. They are to let Marcus and Vivian deposit the fraudulent acquisition money to pay off Jada's immediate creditors. They are to wait exactly 48 hours until the new buyers inevitably discover the massive toxic debt hidden beneath the company's ledger. And then Naomi commands, her voice ringing with undisputed authority, they will initiate the legal strike. Because without the successor liability protection clause, the buyers will immediately sue Marcus and Vivian for personal fraud. The federal investigators will realize the family attempted to conceal the embezzled funds through a corporate shell sale. The $10 million will be frozen, Jada will lose her remaining leverage, and the Williams family will face absolute, inescapable ruin. Julian smiles a slow, dangerous expression of pure admiration. He signals to the legal team to begin drafting the necessary injunctions. Naomi walks over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the sprawling financial district below. The $10,000 check sits forgotten in her pocket. She had signed away her birthright, but in doing so, she had purchased the perfect, undeniable destruction of the people who had always treated her like a burden. The Trojan horse is inside the gates and the countdown has officially begun. The bass vibrates through the imported marble floors of Jada and Spencer's sprawling estate. The mansion, heavily mortgaged and mere days away from foreclosure, is currently packed with 300 of Manhattan's most superficial socialites. It is a spectacle of absolute unhinged excess. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulate with silver trays of beluga caviar and perfectly seared Wagyu beef. A towering ice sculpture shaped like a dollar sign dominates the center of the main hall, dripping slowly onto a bed of crushed orchids. Jada stands at the top of the grand staircase wearing a custom couture gown that cost more than most people earn in a year. She holds a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon, her eyes shining with manic, unearned triumph. "To the future!" Jada shouts, raising her glass to the cheering crowd below. "And to Apex Acquisitions for recognizing true vision and paying $10 million for it." The crowd applauds, entirely oblivious to the reality of the situation. Jada descends the stairs immediately, surrounded by sycophants begging for investment advice. She laughs, tossing her hair over her shoulder, loudly boasting about how she outsmarted her entire family. She tells a captivated circle of influencers that she graciously allowed her sister Naomi to walk away with a pathetic $10,000 buyout, framing herself as a benevolent victor who took pity on a jealous sibling. Across the room, Spencer is aggressively tipping a bartender with a platinum credit card. He signs a receipt for another case of champagne, his hand trembling slightly. The card is maxed out. In fact, every single line of credit they possess is currently stretched to its absolute breaking point. They funded this massive celebration by liquidating Spencer's last remaining retirement account and pulling cash advances on high-interest credit cards. Spencer wipes a bead of sweat from his forehead, muttering to himself that the Apex wire transfer is scheduled to hit their accounts at exactly 9 the next morning. In his desperate mind, tonight is just an advance on their impending millions. Meanwhile, 30 floors above the city, the Vanguard Financial War Room is a sanctuary of cold, calculated silence. The only sounds are the rhythmic clicking of keyboards and the soft hum of the city far below. There is no champagne here. There is no loud music. There is only the surgical precision of an empire preparing to strike. Naomi stands at the head of a massive slate table, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes locked on the digital clock projected onto the main screen. The 48-hour window is closing. Julian sits to her right, reviewing a stack of federal injunctions with Evelyn Hayes, Vanguard's lead acquisitions attorney. The Apex acquisition funds were deposited into the Williams estate holding account exactly 47 hours and 40 minutes ago, Evelyn states, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. As expected, Marcus and Vivian immediately attempted to reroute $3 million to cover Jada's most aggressive creditors. They also attempted to wire $200,000 to Spencer's personal offshore account. Naomi traces the edge of the table with her fingertip. Did the transfers clear? Negative. Julian answers smoothly, not looking up from the documents. Our banking partners flagged the transactions under the Patriot Act the moment they were initiated. The funds are suspended in a frozen holding pattern. They think the money is moving, but it is trapped. Naomi turns to the glowing screen. The timer clicks down. 19 minutes left until the legal trap snaps shut. Back at the mansion, the party is reaching a fever pitch. Jada pulls Spencer onto the makeshift dance floor, wrapping her arms around his neck. She whispers in his ear about the yachts they are going to look at next week. She talks about buying a summer home in Monaco. She is entirely detached from reality, floating on a cloud of absolute hubris. Spencer forces a smile, but his phone vibrates in his tuxedo pocket. He pulls it out, squinting at the screen. It is an automated alert from his primary bank indicating an overdraft fee. He quickly swipes the notification away, ignoring the cold knot twisting in his stomach. He grabs another glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downs it in one gulp. He tells himself it is just a banking glitch. Tomorrow they will be untouchable, inside the Vanguard war room. 10 minutes, Evelyn announces, compiling a thick stack of finalized paperwork into a sleek leather binder. Without the successor liability clause in the waiver, Naomi signed the moment the 48-hour grace period expires. Apex Acquisitions will officially claim discovery of fraudulent debt. And what happens the exact second that claim is filed? Naomi asks, wanting to hear the execution protocol out loud. Julian leans back in his leather chair, a predatory gleam in his dark eyes. Apex immediately sues Williams' estate for corporate fraud. The $10 million acquisition fund is legally seized by the federal courts as evidence. Marcus, Vivian, Jada, and Spencer become personally jointly liable for the entire hidden debt. Because they attempted to use an acquisition to launder embezzled funds, it triggers a federal investigation. Warrants will be issued automatically. Naomi looks out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights glitter like scattered diamonds. For years, she had watched her family celebrate their stolen victories. She had watched them toast to their own arrogance while pushing her down into the dirt. They were currently dancing in a mansion funded by lies, toasting to a bailout that did not exist. 5 minutes. Evelyn states, her fingers hovering over the submit button on her secure terminal. Naomi closes her eyes, taking a deep, centering breath. She pictures Jada holding that crystal flute. She pictures her parents congratulating themselves on finally discarding their troublesome younger daughter for a mere $10,000. She pictures the sheer, unadulterated shock that will hit them when the music stops. Are the federal agents in position? Naomi asks, her voice devoid of any hesitation. 2 units are currently staged at the front gates of Jada's estate. Julian confirms, checking his secure messaging application. Local authorities are assisting with crowd control. They are just waiting for our filing to hit the federal docket. At the estate, the DJ cuts the music, grabbing a microphone to hype up the crowd. Let us make some noise for our hosts tonight, the newly minted multimillionaires Jada and Spencer. The crowd erupts into cheers. Jada blows kisses to her friends, basking in the adoration. This is the moment she has always believed she deserved. Total validation, total wealth, total superiority over her sister. She signals the bartender to start pouring the reserved tequila. In the war room, the digital clock hits 0. Naomi opens her eyes. The reflection of the clock glows in the glass window. The waiting is over. The Trojan horse has opened its gates. Execute, Naomi commands. Evelyn presses the key. The documents are instantly transmitted to the federal court system, the banking regulators, and the SEC. The trap is sprung. There is no undoing it. Naomi turns away from the window and looks at her husband. Julian stands, walking over to hand her a glass of sparkling water. They do not need champagne to celebrate. The quiet, undeniable certainty of victory is intoxicating enough. The hammer just dropped, Julian says softly, checking his phone. The accounts are officially frozen. The warrants are active. Naomi takes a slow sip of her water. She looks down at the city, picturing the flashing red and blue lights pulling up to a mansion. Call the security desk, Naomi instructs Evelyn. Make sure the lobby is clear. My parents will be showing up here very soon, and they are going to be incredibly desperate. The leather chair barely makes a sound as Naomi settles into it. She folds her hands perfectly in front of her, her expression an impenetrable mask of absolute authority. Evelyn Hayes takes the seat to her immediate right, snapping open a sleek briefcase. The rest of the legal team flanks the perimeter of the room, standing like silent sentinels. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody speaks. The Williams family stares at Naomi, processing her sudden, inexplicable presence at the helm of the acquiring conglomerate. Jada is the first to break the silence. She lets out a sharp, condescending laugh, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. What is this, Naomi? Did you get a job as an administrative assistant here? We are waiting for the acquisitions director. Fetch us some coffee while we sign the final transfer. Naomi does not blink. I am the acquisitions director, Jada. I am also the CEO of the subsidiary shell company you thought you were selling our family legacy to. Apex Acquisitions answers to Vanguard Financial. Vanguard Financial answers to my husband. And on this particular deal, my husband answers to me. Marcus slams his hand flat against the mahogany table. This is a childish stunt. You signed the waiver. You surrendered your voting rights for $10,000. The company is ours to sell, and you have absolutely zero authority to sit in that chair and delay our payout. I am not delaying your payout, Naomi says smoothly. She gestures to Evelyn. I am canceling it. Evelyn slides a thick stack of stapled documents across the polished table. They glide to a halt perfectly in front of Marcus. That is the final audit report for Williams' estate, Naomi explains, her voice ringing with icy clarity. A report initiated by Apex Acquisitions during our standard 48-hour grace period following your signature on the sale agreement. What we found was nothing short of breathtaking. $3 million embezzled. Massive high-interest loans taken out against the company's core assets to cover personal gambling debts. Fraudulent wire transfers routed to offshore accounts. Vivian shifts uncomfortably, pulling her designer coat tighter around her shoulders. You cannot cancel the sale. The contract is signed. We deposited the $10 million wire transfer yesterday. You received a provisional deposit, Evelyn corrects her, adjusting her glasses, which was immediately flagged and frozen by federal banking regulators under the Patriot Act. You attempted to use a corporate acquisition to launder embezzled funds and pay off illicit debts. The money is gone. In fact, it has already been seized as evidence. Spencer jumps out of his chair, his face slick with panic. He points a trembling finger at Naomi. You signed the waiver. You agreed to the buyout. We hold all the leverage and you absorb the company debt. That is how an acquisition works. Naomi smiles. It is a terrifying, predatory expression. That is exactly how an acquisition works, Spencer, assuming your lawyer actually knows how to draft a contract. Naomi leans forward, fixing her gaze entirely on her father. Richard Sterling was so desperate to finalize this sale and get his cut that he copy-pasted a boilerplate buyout agreement. He failed to include a successor liability protection clause. The silence that descends on the room is absolute. Marcus stares blankly, not fully grasping the legal terminology. Jada looks frantically between her husband and her father. Allow me to translate, Naomi continues softly. By omitting that single clause, Apex Acquisitions does not absorb your hidden fraudulent debts. We only acquire the physical assets. The liabilities remain attached to the previous majority shareholders, personally. Jada's mouth falls open. No, that is illegal. We are a corporation. You were a corporation, Naomi corrects her. But the moment you signed that fraudulent acquisition agreement to cover up your federal crimes, you pierced the corporate veil. You are now personally, jointly, and severally liable for the entire missing $3 million, plus penalties, plus interest. You set up your own family, Vivian whispers, horror dawning in her eyes as she realizes the sheer magnitude of the trap. You signed that waiver knowing it would destroy us. I signed that waiver to protect myself, Naomi states flatly. By executing the minority shareholder buyout under those specific terms, I legally severed myself from the blast radius. I am officially immune to the financial and criminal consequences of your actions. You handed me the exact weapon I needed, and I simply pulled the trigger. Marcus lunges forward, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. I will ruin you for this. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. You think you are so smart, Naomi? But you are nothing without that billionaire husband of yours. Naomi does not flinch. She does not raise her voice. You do not have 20 years, Marcus. You do not even have 20 minutes. As if cued by her words, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swing open again. Two federal agents step inside, badges displayed prominently on their belts. Two uniformed police officers stand directly behind them in the corridor. Marcus Williams, Vivian Williams, Jada Williams, and Spencer Hastings. The lead agent announces, his voice echoing off the glass walls. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate espionage. Please step away from the table and keep your hands where we can see them. Panic erupts. Jada begins screaming hysterically, demanding to call her lawyer, forgetting that Richard Sterling had already abandoned them. Spencer immediately throws his hands in the air, babbling about a plea deal and claiming he was manipulated by his wife. Vivian collapses into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Marcus stands frozen, his eyes locked on Naomi. The patriarchal superiority he had wielded over her for 3 decades is entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a completely broken man. Naomi stands up smoothly, buttoning her jacket. She steps around the table, walking straight past her family as the federal agents move in with handcuffs. She does not offer a word of apology. She does not gloat. She simply walks out of the room, leaving the noise, the desperation, and the toxicity of her past behind her. Stepping into the private executive elevator, Naomi finds Julian waiting inside. He hits the button for the penthouse level, turning to hand her a fresh glass of sparkling water. It is done, Julian asks softly. It is done, Naomi replies, taking a slow sip. She looks at her reflection in the polished brass doors. The woman staring back at her is no longer a victim, no longer a scapegoat, and no longer a Williams. She is the undisputed architect of her own empire, and the view from the top is absolutely flawless. 72 hours after federal agents marched the Williams family out of the Vanguard Financial Building in handcuffs, the reality of their situation had still not fully penetrated their staggering arrogance. Out on a heavily leveraged bail bond that drained the last hidden reserves of Marcus's offshore accounts, the family receives a formal summons. The newly appointed receivership judge mandates their attendance at the Apex Acquisitions Tower to formally sign over the physical deeds to their remaining properties. They arrive at the gleaming glass and steel monolith of the Apex building in downtown Manhattan, clinging desperately to the illusion of their former status. Jada wears a designer trench coat, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, to shield herself from the paparazzi hovering near the revolving doors. Spencer follows closely behind, sweating through a rented, wrinkled suit. Marcus and Vivian walk with stiff, unnatural posture, trying to project authority they no longer possess. A silent security detail escorts them to the top floor. The executive boardroom is a cavernous space of polished mahogany floor-to-ceiling windows and absolute intimidating silence. They take their seats on one side of the massive table, waiting for the corporate executioner they believe they can still charm or manipulate. The double doors at the far end of the room swing open. Naomi walks in. She wears a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal power suit, her posture immaculate, projecting the kind of effortless dominance her father had spent his entire life trying to fake. She is flanked by a dozen high-powered corporate lawyers who fan out along the perimeter of the room like a well-oiled machine. Naomi does not look at her family with anger or pity. She looks at them as mere administrative tasks to be completed before her afternoon meetings. She takes the seat at the absolute head of the table. Jada stands up immediately, slamming her hands flat against the mahogany surface. Her voice is shrill, vibrating with unhinged denial and wounded narcissism. Get out of here, Naomi. I am not doing this with you today. We are here to meet with the leadership of Apex Acquisitions to restructure our asset forfeiture. We are not negotiating with Julian's proxy, and we are certainly not negotiating with you. Get out of the executive room and send in the person actually in charge. Marcus points a trembling finger toward the door, backing up his golden child out of sheer habit. Your sister is right. You have done enough damage with your petty little traps. We are dealing directly with the principal buyer today. The adults are talking. Leave. Naomi does not blink. She does not raise her voice. The absolute stillness of her demeanor sucks the remaining oxygen out of the room. She reaches into the inner pocket of her tailored blazer and withdraws a sleek silver card holder. With a flick of her thumb, she extracts a single heavy stock business card. She places 2 fingers on the edge of the card and slides it across the vast mahogany table. It glides with a soft, expensive whisper, coming to a perfect halt, exactly halfway between Marcus and Jada. Nobody breathes. Marcus lowers his gaze to the card. The text is embossed in minimalist silver lettering. Naomi Williams Sterling, founder and chief executive officer, Apex Acquisitions. The silence that crashes over the room is absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The color completely drains from Marcus's face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He stares at the piece of heavy cardstock as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike. Vivian covers her mouth with both hands, a choked, pathetic gasp escaping her throat. The realization hits them with the force of a physical blow. The massive corporate conglomerate that had systematically dismantled their empire. The ruthless entity that had cornered their debt, triggered the federal audit, and now legally possessed every single asset the Williams family had ever claimed to own, did not belong to a faceless board of investors. It did not belong to Julian. It belonged entirely, absolutely, and legally to the daughter they had spent 30 years calling a failure. There is no one else coming through those doors, Jada, Naomi states, her voice ringing with icy, undeniable authority. There is no hidden savior. There is no principal buyer waiting in the wings to take pity on your staggering incompetence. You are looking at the architect of your ruin. Spencer sinks back into his leather chair, burying his face in his hands. Jada's mouth opens and closes, but no sound comes out. The delusion she had used as a shield her entire life shatters into a million irreparable pieces. She looks at her sister, finally seeing the apex predator Naomi had become, while they were all too busy underestimating her. Marcus finally finds his voice, though it is nothing more than a hollow, defeated rasp. How did you build this? We gave you nothing. You gave me everything I needed, Naomi replies, leaning forward slightly, resting her forearms on the table. You gave me isolation. While you were pouring millions of dollars into Jada's failed startups and bailing her out of every disastrous mistake she made, I was learning how the real world operates. While you were parading her around country clubs as the future of Williams' estate, I was working 90-hour weeks learning how to identify toxic assets and dismantle failing companies. I did not ask for a seat at your table, Marcus. I decided to build my own. Vivian begins to weep softly, the sound pathetic in the vastness of the boardroom. Naomi, please, you have made your point. You have proven you are the smartest one in the room. But we are facing federal prison. They are going to take the house. We have absolutely nothing left. You cannot do this to your own blood. You severed those blood ties the moment you demanded I take the fall for Jada's felonies. Naomi counters, devoid of a single ounce of sympathy. You sat in my office and demanded I sacrifice my freedom so your golden child could continue living a lie. You treated me as collateral damage. Now you are simply experiencing the return on your investment. Naomi signals to the lead corporate attorney standing silently to her right. The lawyer steps forward, dropping thick stacks of legal documents directly in front of Marcus, Vivian, Jada, and Spencer. These are the final forfeiture agreements. Naomi instructs, her tone shifting to pure mechanical business. You will sign over the deeds to the Beacon Hill property, the Hamptons estate, and the remaining liquid capital in your offshore accounts. In exchange, Apex Acquisitions will not pursue secondary civil litigation for the fraudulent succession clause you attempted to sneak past my firm last week. You have exactly 3 minutes to sign, or my legal team contacts the federal prosecutor to add attempted corporate fraud to your existing criminal charges. Marcus picks up the heavy fountain pen provided by the attorneys. His hands shake so violently he can barely grip the metal barrel. He looks up at Naomi one last time, searching for any trace of the daughter who used to desperately crave his approval. He finds only a Titan cold, untouchable, and victorious. He signs his name on the dotted line, officially transferring his entire legacy into her hands. Jada signs next, tears splashing onto the pristine white paper, her public humiliation complete. Vivian and Spencer follow without a single word of protest. Naomi gathers the signed documents, tapping them sharply against the table to align the edges. She hands them to her legal team, then stands up, buttoning her jacket with precise, unhurried movements. "My security team will escort you out of my building," Naomi says, turning her back on the people who had tormented her for a lifetime. "Do not ever attempt to contact me again. The Williams family business is officially concluded." "Wait," Naomi says, her voice cutting through the heavy silence of the boardroom. The security guards immediately halt, stepping back from the heavy glass doors. Marcus, Vivian, Jada, and Spencer turn around. They look drained, having just signed over the deeds to their remaining properties to avoid a secondary civil lawsuit. They clearly believe the humiliation is over. They are completely wrong. Naomi walks back to the head of the polished mahogany table. She picks up the thick, leather-bound acquisition contract that Richard Sterling had tried to force on her just days ago. She flips it open to a dog-eared page, smoothing the heavy paper flat with a manicured hand. "You came here today expecting to negotiate the final terms of your corporate buyout." Naomi begins, her eyes locking onto her father. "You believe that despite the federal charges hanging over your heads, Apex Acquisitions was still bound by the original $10 million valuation. You genuinely thought that money would eventually clear, paying off Jada's debts and leaving you with a comfortable, quiet retirement in some smaller house." Marcus swallows hard, his ashen face twitching. "The contract was signed," he rasps, clinging desperately to his last shred of business authority. "You froze the funds under the Patriot Act, but the valuation stands. The company has physical assets. We surrendered our properties. The buyout money belongs to us." Naomi smiles. It is a terrifying clinical expression devoid of any warmth. "The company had assets," she corrects him softly. "But you seem to have forgotten the weapon you handed me last week. When you sent your sleazy lawyer to bully me into signing away my 20% minority shareholder rights for a pathetic $10,000, you inadvertently signed your own corporate death warrant." Naomi gestures to Evelyn Hayes, her lead acquisitions attorney. Evelyn steps forward, tapping a key on her tablet. The massive digital screen behind them illuminates, projecting a highly magnified section of the legal waiver. "By forcing my signature on that waiver, you removed the only dissenting board member," Naomi explains, pacing slowly along the length of the table. "Under standard corporate restructuring laws, unanimous board action involving fraudulent debt triggers an immediate acceleration clause. Because Jada embezzled $3 million and leveraged toxic debt against the company's core assets, Williams' estate officially defaulted the exact moment the ink dried on my waiver." Jada stares at the glowing screen, her eyes wide with uncomprehending panic. "What does that mean? What acceleration clause? We are getting $10 million. "It means," Naomi says, stopping directly in front of her sister, "that the $10 million acquisition offer is legally void. Apex is not buying Williams' estate for $10 million. In fact, due to the massive federal liabilities you created, the adjusted market valuation of the company has crashed to absolute zero." Naomi reaches into the inner pocket of her tailored charcoal blazer. She pulls out a crisp, single $1 bill. She places it delicately on the glass surface of the table and slides it across the wood until it rests perfectly in front of her father. "Under the strict terms of hostile restructuring and fraud recovery," Naomi states, her voice ringing with absolute crushing finality, "Apex Acquisitions is formally acquiring the entirety of Williams' estate for exactly $1. That is the true mathematical value of the legacy you built, Marcus. $1 single dollar." Vivian lets out a choked, devastated sob, gripping the edge of the table to keep her legs from giving out. Marcus stares down at the dollar bill as if it is radioactive. The company he had built from the ground up, the empire he had used to exert patriarchal control and demand blind obedience, reduced to pocket change. "You cannot do this," Marcus whispers, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming arrogance. "It is illegal. It is theft. I will call the regulators." "It is completely legal and already finalized." Evelyn interjects, her tone perfectly flat and professional. "The filings were approved by a federal bankruptcy judge at 9 o'clock this morning. Apex is assuming the physical assets to liquidate at our discretion. The fraudulent liabilities, however, remain entirely attached to you personally." Naomi does not break eye contact with her father. "You are looking at the new sole owner of Williams' estate, which brings us to my first official act as chief executive." She picks up a sleek silver pen and signs the bottom of the restructuring document. The stroke of her pen is deafening in the silent room. "As the acquiring entity, Apex is restructuring the entire organizational chart to eliminate redundancies," Naomi announces, her gaze sweeping over her family. "Effective immediately, the executive board of Williams Estate is dissolved. Marcus, you are terminated as CEO. Vivian, you are terminated as Vice President of Public Relations. Jada, you are terminated as Director of Acquisitions." Jada shakes her head frantically, stepping backward until she hits the glass wall. "No, you have to pay me severance. I have a contract. I have a golden parachute clause." "Your contracts are void due to gross negligence and criminal conspiracy." Naomi shoots back, shutting down her sister's outburst instantly. "There will be no golden parachutes. There will be no severance packages. Your health insurance policies, your corporate expense accounts, your company vehicles, and your luxury penthouse leases are canceled as of this exact second." Spencer, who has been standing silently in the corner, finally realizes the absolute totality of their ruin. He looks at Jada, his face slick with a cold sweat. "We have nothing," he mutters, his hands pulling frantically at his hair. "We cannot even afford a taxi back to the estate." "You no longer have an estate," Naomi reminds him coldly. "The forfeiture documents you signed 20 minutes ago go into effect immediately. You have until midnight to collect your personal clothing before the locks are changed, and my security team disposes of whatever is left." The destruction is absolute and surgical. Naomi watches the family that had spent a lifetime diminishing her value finally grasp their own complete worthlessness in the corporate world. They had built their entire identity on wealth status and the illusion of unearned superiority. With a single dollar bill and a flawless legal strategy, Naomi has stripped them of everything. Marcus slowly reaches out and picks up the $1 bill. His hand trembles so violently, the paper flutters in his grip. He looks at Naomi, his eyes completely hollow. He has no threats left to hurl. He has no leverage to pull. He is a ruined man holding a single piece of paper, facing federal prison and total bankruptcy. Naomi signals the security detail waiting by the doors. "Take their corporate key cards and their security badges," Naomi instructs the guards. "Then escort them out through the service elevator. They no longer have executive floor privileges." The guards step forward, their expressions unyielding. Jada begins to weep hysterically as a guard politely but firmly demands her keycard. Vivian leans heavily on Marcus, both of them moving like sleepwalkers as they are ushered out of the boardroom. Naomi turns away before they even reach the doors. She walks back to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling Manhattan skyline. The afternoon sun catches the glass of 1,000 skyscrapers, reflecting a brilliant, undeniable future. She does not feel a shred of guilt or hesitation. She feels the pure, unadulterated weightlessness of a woman who has finally conquered her own life. The heavy silence of the boardroom is suddenly shattered by a violent scuffle. As the security guards move to herd the ruined family toward the service elevators, Spencer abruptly violently jerks his arm free from the guard's grip. His face is flushed a dark, furious crimson, and the veins in his neck bulge against his rented collar. He refuses to be marched out like a common criminal. "Take your hands off me!" Spencer spits at the guard before turning his manic, desperate gaze back toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You think you have won, Naomi? You think you can just write us off with a single dollar bill?" Naomi does not immediately turn around. She continues to look out at the Manhattan skyline. her posture relaxed and entirely unbothered by his outburst. "You only beat your pathetic parents and my idiot wife," Spencer yells, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "My real estate firm is completely insulated from this disaster. Hastings Properties is a separate legal entity. I have a $15 million commercial portfolio. The moment I walk out of this building, I am calling my corporate litigators. I am going to sue Apex Acquisitions for malicious business practices. I will tie you up in civil court for a decade and bleed your new empire dry." Jada stops crying for a fraction of a second, looking at her husband with a sudden, desperate spark of hope. Marcus and Vivian also pause, clinging to the idea that Spencer might actually have the financial firepower to save them from total destitution. Naomi finally turns away from the window. She looks at Spencer with an expression of profound, chilling pity. She does not say a word. She simply shifts her gaze toward the boardroom entrance. The heavy double doors swing open with a soft, expensive glide. Julian walks into the room. He wears a bespoke midnight blue suit, his presence instantly commanding the absolute submission of everyone in the space. He moves with the predatory grace of a man who owns the world and everything in it. "I would strongly advise against calling your lawyer Spencer," Julian says, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cuts through the tension like a razor. "They stopped working for you at 9 o'clock this morning, when your retainer checks bounced." Julian walks directly to the head of the mahogany table. He casually tosses a crisp, thick legal document onto the polished wood. It slides perfectly across the surface, stopping just inches from Spencer's trembling hands. "What is this?" Spencer breathes, his previous bravado vanishing instantly. "That is a formal notice of foreclosure," Julian states, adjusting his cuffs. "It seems you omitted a few crucial details when boasting about your impressive real estate portfolio. Hastings Properties secured a $15 million expansion loan 6 months ago to acquire those commercial spaces. A loan of that magnitude for a relatively new firm required substantial collateral." Spencer stares at the document, his face draining of all color. He looks exactly like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. "You told the regional bank that your collateral was rock solid," Julian continues, his tone dripping with lethal amusement. "What you failed to mention was the origin of that collateral. Your wife secretly pledged Williams Estate Properties and corporate shares to underwrite your commercial debt, assets she claimed to own free and clear." Jada's mouth falls open. She looks at Spencer in absolute horror. "You used my shares. You told me you had private investors." "Shut up, Jada," Spencer hisses, sweat beading rapidly on his forehead. "Unfortunately for you," Julian says, stepping closer to the table, "those shares were worthless, and the properties were already severely leveraged to cover Jada's embezzlement. You used fraudulent family assets to back your corporate loans, Spencer. That is textbook bank fraud, and it constitutes an immediate, uncorrectable violation of your loan covenants." Vivian lets out a sharp gasp, collapsing against Marcus, who looks as though he might have a heart attack right there on the boardroom floor. "The bank was preparing to alert the federal authorities," Julian explains smoothly, "but my private equity firm stepped in. We purchased your entire debt portfolio yesterday evening. I now own your $15 million loan, Spencer, and because your collateral is entirely fraudulent, I am enacting the acceleration clause." Julian leans forward, placing both hands flat on the mahogany table, looking directly into Spencer's terrified eyes. "I am calling in the debt, all $15 million, today." Spencer's knees visibly buckle. He catches himself against the back of a leather chair, gasping for air. "I do not have $15 million in liquid cash. The properties are tied up in development. You cannot do this. It will bankrupt me instantly." "You are already bankrupt," Julian corrects him with brutal finality. "My asset recovery team seized your corporate bank accounts 30 minutes ago. Your commercial properties are being locked down by federal receivers. Your firm is dead, Spencer. You have absolutely nothing left." The illusion of Spencer's wealth and superiority shatters into a million irreparable pieces. The reality of his situation crashes down on him with suffocating weight. He is not a real estate mogul. He is a fraud who built a house of cards on his wife's stolen assets. and the wind has just blown it all away. Jada suddenly launches herself at Spencer, pounding her fists against his chest. You lied to me. You said we were rich. You used my family's money, and now we are going to prison because of you. Because of me! Spencer roars back, pushing her away aggressively. You are the one who embezzled $3 million to pay off your gambling debts. You are the reason the collateral was toxic. You ruined my life, Jada. The two of them tear into each other, hurling vicious insults and exposing every toxic, self-serving lie their marriage was built upon. The loyalty they pretended to have vanishes the moment the money disappears. They are like rats fighting on a sinking ship, completely oblivious to the fact that they are both already drowning. Naomi watches the pathetic display with cold detachment. She steps up beside Julian, who wraps a protective arm around her waist. They stand together, an unbreakable united front, watching the people who tried to destroy them destroy themselves instead. Naomi gives a subtle nod to the security guards. Get them out of my building, Naomi commands. The guards do not hesitate. They physically separate a screaming Jada and a hyperventilating Spencer. They grab Marcus and Vivian by the arms. The family is dragged backward toward the service doors. Spencer continues to babble incoherently about calling the bank, his mind completely broken by the magnitude of his ruin. Jada wails Naomi's name, begging for mercy she never once offered to her sister. The heavy service doors slam shut, cutting off their desperate cries. The boardroom falls dead silent once again. The air feels remarkably clean. Julian looks down at the foreclosure notice resting on the table, then turns his gaze to Naomi, a slow, deeply affectionate smile spreading across his face. He raises a hand and gently tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Your empire is secure, Mrs. Sterling, Julian murmurs softly. It was never just about securing the empire, Naomi replies, turning to look back out the massive windows at the sprawling city. It was about burning down the rot so we could build something flawless in its place. The heavy service doors are inches from swinging shut when the final fracture occurs. Spencer violently rips his arm from the security guard's grasp and shoves Jada away with such force that she stumbles backward, her expensive heels catching on the threshold. She crashes onto the polished marble floor of the corridor, tearing the fabric of her designer coat. The guards hesitate, stepping back just enough to let the inevitable implosion unfold. Spencer does not reach down to help his wife. He stands over her, his chest heaving, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. The illusion of their power couple dynamic evaporates in an instant, replaced by the vicious reality of two cornered animals. Do not touch me, Spencer snarls, pointing a shaking finger at her as she reaches up toward him. Do not ever put your hands on me again. You lied to me. You lied to me about absolutely everything. Jada looks up at him, her mascara running down her face in dark, jagged streaks. She is trembling, completely unmoored by the sudden hostility from the man she had flaunted like a trophy for years. Spencer, please, she begs, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. We are in this together. We can fix it. My dad has offshore accounts. We can hire better lawyers. There are no offshore accounts, Spencer screams, the sound echoing off the glass walls. There is nothing. Your father just sold the entire family legacy for a $1 bill. You are broke, Jada. You have always been broke. You told me the Williams Trust was a bottomless well. You told me your tech startup was on the verge of a $50 million buyout. You convinced me to leverage my entire commercial real estate portfolio against your family's assets because you swore those assets were untouchable. Vivian tries to step forward to comfort her daughter, but Marcus grabs her arm, pulling her back. They are both too consumed by their own impending federal indictments to offer any actual protection. They watch in hollow silence as their golden child is verbally eviscerated. You used my company, Spencer continues, his voice dripping with venom. You forged Naomi's signature to steal $3 million, and then you used my legitimate business as collateral to hide your crimes. You dragged me into a federal conspiracy, Jada. You ruined my life just to maintain your pathetic socialite image. I did it for us, Jada sobs, pulling her knees to her chest. I did it so we could keep the mansion, so we could keep the lifestyle you wanted. You never complained when I was paying for the private jets and the vacations. I married you for the capital. Spencer fires back, stripping away the final pretense of their marriage. The brutality of his honesty hits Jada like a physical blow. She gasps, shrinking back against the wall. I married the Williams estate heiress, but you are not an heiress. You are a fraud. You are a gambling addict who destroyed her own family, and I refuse to let you destroy me. Spencer turns away from her, adjusting his ruined jacket, desperately trying to salvage some shred of his dignity. He looks back into the boardroom, meeting Julian's cold, observant gaze. Julian, Spencer says, his tone shifting instantly from rage to desperate negotiation. Naomi, listen to me. I had absolutely no idea she was forging financial documents. I am a victim of her fraud, just like you are. If you hold off on calling in my $15 million loan, I will cooperate entirely. I will go to the federal prosecutors today. I will testify against Jada. I will give you Marcus and Vivian on a silver platter. I have emails. I have text messages. I will hand over everything I have if you just restructure my debt and leave Hastings Properties out of the crossfire. Jada lets out a guttural, horrified wail. Her own husband is trying to sell her to the federal government for a loan extension. She looks at Spencer as if he has turned into a monster, completely oblivious to the fact that he is simply mirroring the exact same ruthless self-preservation she had always shown Naomi. Naomi slowly walks toward the doorway, stopping just inside the boardroom. She looks down at Jada, weeping on the floor, and then up at Spencer, practically begging like a dog. Your loyalty is as bankrupt as your company, Spencer, Naomi says, her voice smooth and devoid of any sympathy. You happily spent the stolen money when it benefited you. You gladly stood by my sister while she hurled insults and handed over forged bank statements at the charity gala. You only care about the truth now because the check bounced. I am offering you the key to locking them away forever. Spencer pleads, sweating profusely. I already have the key, Naomi replies flatly. I have the audit, I have the wire transfers, I have the signed waiver that proves they attempted corporate fraud. You have absolutely nothing to offer me, Spencer. Julian owns your debt, and he will liquidate your firm by the end of the week. Spencer's jaw drops. He looks wildly between Naomi and Julian, realizing his final betrayal has bought him exactly nothing. He turns back to Jada, his face pale and slick with panic. I am filing for divorce, he announces, his voice devoid of any emotion. The moment I leave this building, I am calling my attorneys. I am seeking a full annulment based on financial fraud. I want my name severed from yours completely. Do not call me. Do not come back to the estate. We are done. Jada collapses fully onto the marble floor. The golden child who had spent 30 years believing she was invincible shatters completely. She has lost the tech startup she stole. She has lost the family empire. She has lost her mansion. She is facing years in a federal penitentiary. And now the husband she had constantly flaunted to prove her superiority has discarded her like trash in front of the sister she despised. She screams, thrashing against the floor, sobbing so violently she begins to hyperventilate. It is an ugly, pathetic display of total defeat. Take them out, Naomi instructs the guards, turning her back on the spectacle. And call the cleaning staff. The floor is a mess. The security guards move in without hesitation. They haul a limp, hysterically weeping Jada to her feet, dragging her by her arms toward the service elevator. Marcus and Vivian follow in silent, devastated submission. Spencer walks ahead of them, refusing to even look at his wife, frantically typing on his phone as he prepares to scramble for the last scraps of his ruined life. The heavy doors finally swing shut, cutting off Jada's wailing. The silence that returns to the boardroom is profound and absolute. Naomi takes a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of her sharp charcoal blazer. The toxic roots of her past have not just been severed, they have been completely incinerated. The two security guards step forward, their faces impassive as they grip Vivian by the arms and haul her to her feet. She thrashes weakly, her designer mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks. She screams Naomi's name, her voice cracking, pleading for a fraction of the grace she had actively denied her younger daughter for 3 decades. She begs, citing the pain of childbirth, the sacrifices of motherhood, and the unbreakable bonds of blood. Naomi does not even blink. She watches her mother's hysterical display with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. Marcus does not scream. He does not fight. The absolute finality of Naomi's words has effectively stripped the last remaining layers of his ego. He looks around the opulent boardroom of Apex Acquisitions, the empire his discarded daughter built, and finally comprehends the magnitude of his miscalculation. He turns slowly, walking toward the heavy glass doors with a shuffling, defeated gait. He does not look back to help his weeping wife. The unified front they had maintained to torment Naomi has dissolved the exact moment their bank accounts were frozen. As the heavy double doors click shut, sealing the Williams family outside the executive suite forever, the silence in the boardroom is profound. Naomi remains at the head of the table. She does not feel the sharp sting of guilt her mother had tried so desperately to weaponize. Instead, she feels a profound, almost weightless sense of clarity. The ghost of the little girl who had constantly sought her parents' approval vanishes, replaced entirely by the woman who had orchestrated their flawless destruction. Julian steps into her line of sight, having watched the final execution from the corner of the room. He walks over and pours 2 glasses of vintage scotch from the crystal decanter on the sideboard, handing one to her. They clink glasses in the quiet room. There is no need for grand declarations. The war is over. The descent of Marcus and Vivian Williams is rapid and merciless. Without the $10 million Apex buyout, the illusion of their wealth evaporates overnight. The federal authorities seize the remaining Williams estate properties as evidence in the ongoing embezzlement investigation. Within 48 hours, federal marshals arrive at the Beacon Hill mansion. Marcus and Vivian are given exactly 2 hours to pack whatever fits into 4 standard suitcases. They are escorted off the property they had prized above all else, forced to leave behind the antique furniture, the imported art, and the tangible proof of their elite status. The transition from high society royalty to destitute outcasts destroys them. Stripped of their assets and drowning in legal fees, they cannot pay. They are forced to rent a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the outskirts of the city. The rent is funded by the last remnants of Vivian's pawned jewelry. The walls are paper-thin, the heating is unreliable, and the hallway smells perpetually of boiled cabbage and old dust. Vivian, a woman who used to spend her afternoons at exclusive spas complaining about the hired help, now spends her days scrubbing peeling linoleum floors. Confined to the small, depressing space, Marcus and Vivian quickly turn on each other. For years they had bonded over their shared worship of Jada and their mutual disdain for Naomi. Without their golden child to praise or their scapegoat to blame, they are left with nothing but their own colossal failures. Vivian screams at Marcus for his arrogant mismanagement of the company, blaming his blind hubris for letting Naomi slip out of their control. Marcus fires back viciously, reminding Vivian that her endless shopping sprees and coddling created the monster that Jada had become. The tiny apartment echoes with their bitter, endless screaming matches. They have completely lost their social standing. Their former country club friends do not return their calls. The society pages that once fawned over their charity galas now run scathing exposes on their corporate fraud. They are pariahs, toxic liabilities that no one in Manhattan's elite circles wants to touch. Meanwhile, Jada's situation offers them no comfort. Abandoned by Spencer and facing insurmountable federal charges for wire fraud and forgery, she attempts to call Naomi from a holding cell, sobbing and begging for the Vanguard legal team to save her. Naomi simply blocks the number. Out of options, Jada accepts a plea deal. She is sentenced to 36 months in a federal penitentiary. Marcus and Vivian do not attend her sentencing. They cannot afford the transportation, nor can they face the public humiliation of the courtroom press. The golden child they sacrificed everything for is reduced to a prison inmate number, and the legacy they prized above all else is erased from existence. High above the city, completely insulated from the misery her parents are enduring, Naomi begins the work of rebuilding. She officially liquidates the physical assets of Williams' estate, selling off the manufacturing equipment and real estate holdings for a massive profit. With a single decisive stroke of her pen, she legally dissolves the Williams estate corporate charter. The company her father had used as a bludgeon of patriarchal control is wiped from the registry forever. In its place, Naomi establishes a new philanthropic subsidiary under Vanguard Financial. She creates an incubator fund designed specifically to provide venture capital for female entrepreneurs who lack traditional financial backing. She pours the liquidated capital into the hands of women who have the drive to build their own empires, ensuring that the wealth her father hoarded is repurposed to dismantle the very old boy networks he cherished. It is the ultimate insult to Marcus's outdated worldview and the ultimate triumph for Naomi. 6 months later, Naomi stands on the balcony of her penthouse, the city lights reflecting in her dark eyes. The air is crisp and clean. Julian wraps a thick cashmere blanket around her shoulders, stepping out into the night air to stand beside her. He rests his chin against her head, wrapping his arms securely around her waist. She leans back into his warmth, surveying the sprawling metropolis below. She had been handed a life of quiet subjugation, expected to shrink herself to fit into a family that only valued her as collateral damage. Instead, she had seized the board, flipped the pieces, and rewritten the rules of the game entirely. She takes a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute beautiful stillness of her mind. There are no more frantic phone calls demanding her compliance. There are no more holiday dinners designed to humiliate her. There are no more shadows from her past lurking in the corners of her future. The revenge had been meticulously planned, brutally executed, and perfectly sweet. But the true victory is not the destruction of her family. The true victory is the unshakable, brilliant empire she now rules. The speed of their descent is breathtaking. For a family that had spent 3 decades obsessing over optic social standing and the illusion of invincibility, the sudden plunge into absolute poverty is a shock to their very nervous systems. The federal and civil mandates execute with ruthless efficiency, stripping away every asset, every property, and every line of credit they had fraudulently maintained. Spencer is the first to feel the crushing weight of reality. The $15 million commercial loan Julian called in triggers an immediate chain reaction across his entire portfolio. Federal receivers arrive at his luxury condominium project in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, padlocking the construction site and seizing all corporate accounts. His investors, realizing the collateral was fraudulent, file immediate civil suits. Within 48 hours, Hastings Properties is liquidated. Spencer finds himself standing in the gravel parking lot of a cheap neon-lit motel on the outskirts of the city. He unloads 2 trash bags filled with his remaining clothes from the trunk of a rented compact car, his luxury SUV having been repossessed the day before. The room smells of stale smoke and damp carpet. He sits on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper, entirely alone and completely bankrupt. Jada faces an even harsher reckoning. The district attorney's office and the IRS launch a joint investigation into the $3 million she embezzled and the subsequent tax fraud she committed to hide it. Her accounts are frozen. Unable to afford the high-priced defense attorneys, she arrogantly demanded she is assigned an overworked public defender who frankly informs her she is looking at guaranteed prison time. To afford her basic living expenses while awaiting trial, Jada is forced to do something she has never done in her entire life. She gets a job. The golden child of the Williams family now wears a stiff polyester uniform, working the cash register at a mid-tier department store. The humiliation peaks when former acquaintances from her country club walk through her checkout lane. They do not offer sympathy. They offer icy stares and hushed whispers, relishing the spectacular downfall of the woman who used to mock their outfit choices at charity galas. Jada spends her lunch breaks crying in the employee restroom, her designer taste replaced by the bitter reality of minimum wage. For Marcus and Vivian, the loss of the Beacon Hill mansion is the final fatal blow to their pride. The foreclosure is swift and entirely public. Moving trucks arrive under the watchful eyes of their wealthy neighbors, loading the few personal items they are legally allowed to keep. They are forced to sign a lease on a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a decaying building located in a neighborhood they used to actively avoid driving through. The apartment is a suffocating trap. The walls are paper-thin, vibrating with the noise of passing trains and arguing neighbors. Vivian, a woman who once spent her mornings at exclusive spas and her afternoons hosting luncheons, now spends her days aggressively scrubbing stained linoleum floors and clipping grocery coupons. She stares at the cheap laminate countertops, weeping silently for the Parisian shopping sprees and the household staff she once commanded. Marcus sits in the corner of their tiny living room in a worn fabric recliner, a stark contrast to his mahogany CEO chair. He clings to his phone, desperately trying to call his former business associates, his golf partners, and his fellow country club board members. Every single call goes to voicemail. The high society friends they had spent decades cultivating abandon them instantly. In the ruthless world of Manhattan's elite, poverty and federal indictments are highly contagious diseases. The Williams name, once a golden ticket to the city's most exclusive venues, is now a toxic punchline. They are entirely shunned, left to rot in the prison of their own irrelevance. The family turns on each other in the claustrophobic space. Without Naomi to blame for their misfortunes, they are forced to look at their own failures. Vivian screams at Marcus for his arrogant mismanagement, blaming him for letting Naomi slip out of their control. Marcus viciously reminds Vivian that her endless coddling and shopping sprees created the monster that Jada became. Their days bleed into a miserable cycle of bitter arguments and profound regret. They had sacrificed their loyal, capable daughter to elevate a fraud, and the investment had bankrupted them in every conceivable way. Far above the grime and despair of her former family, Naomi sits in her corner office at Apex Acquisitions. The glass walls offer an unobstructed view of the empire she commands. She reviews a quarterly profit report, her mind sharp, her focus unbroken. The noise of her past has been entirely silenced. She does not wonder how they are doing in their motel rooms or their cramped apartments. She does not feel a shred of guilt for pulling the trigger on their destruction. They had dug their own graves with their greed and their arrogance. She simply handed them the shovels. Naomi signs her name at the bottom of the financial report, the ink flowing smoothly. The victory is absolute, the air is clear, and the future is entirely hers. The ink dries on the final acquisition document, officially transferring the physical assets of Williams' estate entirely into Naomi's hands. The crown jewel of her father's crumbling empire was never the corporate holding company itself, but the sprawling, centuries-old vineyard in upstate New York that anchored their wealth. Marcus had always treated the wine business as his exclusive boys' club, a vanity project steeped in elitism and exclusionary practices. Naomi intends to tear that exclusivity out by the roots. She arrives at the estate on a brisk Monday morning. The massive iron gates, once bearing the intertwined initials of her parents, have already been removed by her contracted work crews. Inside the grand tasting room, the legacy management team waits. They are 7 older men in expensive, outdated suits, the exact sycophants Marcus had employed for decades to stroke his ego while the company slowly bled money. They stand when Naomi enters, offering patronizing smiles, clearly assuming that because she is a woman, she will rely on their expertise to keep the estate running. Naomi takes her place at the head of the heavy oak table. She does not sit. She simply slides a stack of termination notices across the polished wood. She informs them that their services are no longer required. When the senior operations director sputters in protest, citing his 30 years of loyalty to her father, Naomi swiftly cuts him off. She lists their catastrophic failures, the ignored supply chain rot, the inflated executive bonuses drawn, while the lower-level staff faced wage cuts and the toxic workplace culture they had cultivated to protect their own mediocrity. She fires the entire toxic management team effectively immediately, giving them precisely 1 hour to vacate the premises. With the rot cleared out, the true reclamation begins. Naomi completely rebrands the wine company. The Williams name is stripped from every bottle, every barrel, and every piece of marketing collateral. In its place, she launches a sleek modern label focused on transparency, heritage, and absolute quality. But a new name requires a new soul, and Naomi knows exactly where to find it. She actively bypasses the traditional insular recruitment networks her father relied upon. Instead, she seeks out raw, unadulterated passion. Naomi hires a dynamic team of young, talented African American entrepreneurs to lead the company into its new era. She appoints a brilliant 30-year-old botanist as her chief viticulturist and brings in a fierce, innovative marketing director who immediately understands the vision. The boardroom, once a stagnant echo chamber of older men agreeing with each other, transforms into a vibrant war room of diverse, brilliant minds, challenging the status quo. Under Naomi's direct leadership, the operational shift is aggressive and uncompromising. She implements fair wage practices for the agricultural workers, upgrades the farming equipment to sustainable technology, and mandates community reinvestment initiatives. She turns the previously failing estate into a massively profitable ethical business. The new vintage is launched not at a stuffy country club, but through a nationwide digital campaign that resonates deeply with a modern, conscious consumer base. The financial returns are staggering. Within 18 months, the rebranded wine company shatters every previous sales record the estate had ever held. Distributors who had previously dropped the Williams label are now begging for allocation. The industry magazines that once featured Marcus as a legacy figurehead now run cover stories on Naomi praising her ruthless efficiency and revolutionary business model. She stands in the newly renovated tasting room, the space now flooded with natural light and contemporary art, holding a crystal glass of their flagship red blend. Julian stands beside her, his arm resting securely around her waist. He raises his glass, his dark eyes shining with profound pride. Naomi takes a sip. The wine is rich, complex, and flawless. Every bottle sold, every glowing review, and every soaring quarterly profit margin serves as undeniable proof that she always had the talent her parents deliberately ignored. They had looked at her entire life and seen only a scapegoat, someone to absorb their failures so their golden child could shine. They had possessed a prodigy in their own home, a titan capable of building empires, and they had cast her aside. She looks out the massive glass doors toward the rolling vineyards. The vines are heavy with new fruit, thriving under the meticulous care of her chosen team. Her parents are currently sitting in their cramped, noisy apartment, relying on discounted groceries and bitterly arguing over their ruined lives. Spencer is sleeping in a cheap motel. Jada is facing the brutal reality of the legal system, stripped of her designer clothes and her unearned arrogance. They had tried to bury her beneath their lies and their debts, but they had forgotten that Naomi was a seed. She had taken the dirt they threw at her and used it to grow an unshakable foundation. The Williams legacy is dead and buried, completely replaced by a thriving, vibrant empire built on Naomi's exact terms. The ultimate revenge was never just their destruction. It was her absolute, undeniable, and permanent victory. Snow falls softly over Manhattan, coating the city in a pristine, glittering layer of white. Inside Naomi and Julian's sprawling triplex penthouse, the atmosphere is a masterclass in genuine warmth and understated luxury. A towering Nordmann fir stands near the floor-to-ceiling windows, adorned with tasteful silver and glass ornaments that catch the ambient light. Soft jazz plays from the state-of-the-art sound system, mingling seamlessly with the bright, unforced laughter of 36 guests. This is not a stiff, performative Williams family gala designed to impress strangers. This is a gathering of chosen family. Naomi navigates the room with effortless grace. She wears a striking emerald green silk evening dress, holding a crystal glass of the flagship red blend from her newly rebranded wine estate. She stops to chat with Evelyn Hayes, her lead acquisitions attorney, who has traded her ruthless boardroom demeanor for a relaxed, genuine smile while exchanging stories with Vanguard financial executives. A few feet away, Julian's parents are in deep conversation with the brilliant young botanist Naomi hired to run her vineyards. Julian's mother, a woman possessing both immense generational wealth and profound kindness, reaches out and gently squeezes Naomi's arm as she passes. She tells Naomi how beautiful the evening is and how proud she is to have her as a daughter-in-law. The contrast between this authentic maternal warmth and Vivian's transactional manipulative affection is not lost on Naomi. Tonight, however, the comparison brings only a deep sense of gratitude instead of grief. The room grows pleasantly warm from the crackling fireplace and the packed crowd. Naomi decides to step out onto the wraparound terrace to catch her breath. The winter air bites instantly sharp and invigorating against her bare arms. She rests her hands on the frosted glass railing, looking out over the glittering expanse of the city. Central Park is a dark, serene rectangle amid the infinite grid of glowing streets. She takes a slow, deep breath, savoring the crispness of the night and the absolute quiet of her own mind. The heavy glass sliding door glides open behind her. Julian steps out onto the terrace, holding a thick cashmere throw. He drapes it carefully over her shoulders, wrapping his arms securely around her waist from behind, and resting his chin against her temple. They do not need to exchange words to understand the magnitude of this moment. Exactly 1 year ago, she was preparing to trigger a corporate execution on her own blood relatives. Tonight, the war is a distant memory, replaced by a quiet, unshakable victory. Julian presses a soft kiss to her cheek. He murmurs that he is going to refill their glasses and step back inside to check on the catering staff. Naomi nods, leaning back into his warmth for a brief second before he releases her and heads back into the penthouse. Standing alone in the quiet snowfall, Naomi feels a sudden sharp vibration in the pocket of her silk dress. She pulls out her private cell phone and glances at the illuminated screen. The notification displays an unsaved number, but the opening words are instantly recognizable. It is a sprawling block of text from Vivian. Even stripped of her wealth and status, Vivian remains a masterclass in desperate manipulation. The message details the freezing temperatures in the cramped, run-down apartment she and Marcus are renting on the outskirts of the city. She complains bitterly about Marcus's failing health and his inability to find even entry-level work due to his ruined corporate reputation. She drops the ultimate guilt trip, mentioning that Jada spent her Christmas morning eating cafeteria food from a metal tray in a federal penitentiary. The message ends with a pathetic begging plea for a wire transfer. Vivian invokes the memory of Naomi's childhood, claiming that a mother's love is unconditional, and asking how her own flesh and blood could leave them to freeze while living in a billionaire's penthouse. A year ago, a message like this might have sparked a flare of righteous anger. It might have triggered that deeply buried, traumatized little girl who desperately wanted her parents to acknowledge their cruelty and apologize. But as Naomi reads the glowing words against the backdrop of the snowy Manhattan skyline, she searches her chest and finds absolutely nothing. There is no anger. There is no residual sorrow. There is no lingering desire to reply with a scathing breakdown of Vivian's hypocrisy, or to remind her mother of the 30 years of psychological torment she endured. The opposite of love is not hate. It is total absolute indifference. The realization washes over her like the gentle snowfall. She has achieved the ultimate form of revenge. She simply does not care. The Williams family, with all their toxic schemes, their unearned arrogance, and their desperate scrambling greed, have become completely irrelevant to her existence. They are strangers dealing with the natural, inescapable consequences of their own malicious choices. With a steady, unhesitating thumb, Naomi swipes left on the screen. She taps the delete icon, watching the message vanish into the digital void. She taps the unsaved number, selects the block contact option, and confirms the action. The final microscopic thread tying her to her toxic past is severed with a soft electronic click. She slides the phone back into her pocket just as the terrace door opens again. Julian emerges, holding 2 fresh glasses of vintage wine. The ambient light from the penthouse casts a warm, golden glow across his face. He walks over to her, his dark eyes full of absolute adoration and unwavering partnership. He hands her a glass and softly asks if everything is all right. Naomi turns away from the city lights and looks directly at the man who stood by her side while she conquered her demons and built her empire. She smiles. It is a brilliant, unrestrained expression of pure, unadulterated freedom. She tells him that everything is absolutely perfect. She takes her glass, links her arm firmly through his, and walks back inside toward the music, the laughter, and the brilliant life she built with her own 2 hands. The heavy glass door slides shut, sealing the warmth and the light inside. The viewpoint drifts backward, pulling slowly away from the glowing terrace, rising higher and higher into the dark, quiet expanse of the snowy night sky, leaving the triumphant queen of Apex Acquisitions to rule her world in absolute peace.